Ni hao, everyone. Ni hao. Now, as you know, in this period of political polarization, we have an awful lot of conspiracy theories floating around. What can you do except take them on one by one and explain why they're false? So in that spirit, I want to deal with a single conspiracy theory today. And here it is, that Donald Trump is a secret agent of Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party, and the nation of China. Now, the Chinese themselves are partly responsible for this theory because they have constantly pointed out that Trump's actions have hurt America and inadvertently helped China. During his first term, they had a name for him, Trump, the China Nation Builder. And some of them referred to him even as Comrade Trump. Now, in his second term, they released a report by a major Chinese university and the party. And the title of that report is Thank You, Trump, where they lay out all the things that he has done that have benefited China. And some Chinese have actually speculated about, is Trump actually a secret agent of China? Now, it is true that some of Trump's actions have benefited China. Let's just go over some of the things they discuss in the report. First of all, Trump has cut funding and other kinds of support for research on clean energy, alternative energy, wind power, solar power, even nuclear power. He has stopped work on wind turbines that were already partially in construction, and he's paid off the companies that were building them. So how does this benefit China? Well, China is the world leader now in alternative energy development, carbon-free energy. They're leaders in research and development, and they're leaders in the creation of new technologies. The conspiracy theorists further point out that for a wide range of technologies that are going to be the technologies of the future, robotics, artificial intelligence, nuclear power, and so on, these technologies are crucially important, and the nation that leads in these is going to lead the world. And it's not us. There's a report that lists 64 emerging technologies and assesses which nation is leading in terms of high-impact research articles, patents, and actual applications. And until very recently, the United States held the top spot. Now it's China. Of the leading research universities in the world, the top 10 are now all Chinese. So what is Trump doing? He's cutting funding to organizations that support this type of research. He's cutting funding and hassling top universities in this country that produce that kind of research. Why? Again, it's to help China compete with us even more effectively, to overtake us even more rapidly. The third point that the conspiracy theorists make has to do with government shutdowns. Now, as you know, during Trump's first term, we had the longest government shutdown that we'd ever had. Now, in his second term, we've had an even longer one. Why would he do this? How does this possibly benefit China? Well, China, they've said this for a long time, and other authoritarian regimes. They've said America brags about how they've got the best political system in the world, but they can't even keep their governments open. I mean, if you can't keep your government open, doesn't that mean you're a failed state? It's true that Trump's chaotic policy changes and his ridiculous approach to governance does shame America. The rest of the world looks at us and they figure, well, it's a nation of assholes led by the biggest of them. The final point the conspiracy theorists like to bring up has to do with Trump's real and threatened military adventures, including the kidnapping of the president of Venezuela, his invasion of Iran, and finally, if it wasn't Trump, if it was anybody else but Trump, we'd laugh at this. But he has threatened to invade Greenland. Really? Seriously? Yes, really, seriously. Seriously enough that several European countries have sent small contingents of military personnel to Nuuk, the capital of Greenland, to just make sure that Trump thinks twice before he invades another NATO country. Again, how does this benefit China? Well, it's no secret China wants Taiwan back. They always have regarded it as a part of China, and they will get it. They resolve to get it back, even if it requires military intervention. Now, if they do ever decide to invade Taiwan, it'll look a whole lot less crazy when put up against the American president's threats to invade Greenland. We have to admit that a lot of the things Trump is doing now are helping China, but that doesn't mean he's an agent. China is benefiting from Trump the way Russia benefited from Trump in his first term, not because he's an agent, but because the Russians have a term, politny idiota, which is a useful idiot. And I'm sure there's a Mandarin equivalent of that, and that's what Trump has been. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about China. We've already talked about its technological progress. Let's talk a little bit about its economic progress. China has been, for the last 30 to 40 years, the most unbelievable economic dynamo the world has ever seen. From 1990 to the early 2000s, they had a growth rate of 10% per year. From the mid-2000s to 2015, the growth rate slowed to 7 to 8% a year, still nearly double the growth rate of the United States. Since then, it's slowed further, but even in 2025, the growth rate was double what it was in the United States. There was a time when the United States was the most economically dynamic country in the world. Not so much anymore. Now, that honor belongs to China. Now let's look at China's history and culture. The United States this year mistakenly celebrated our 250th anniversary. China has been a nation almost 2,000 years longer than America. And when you look back at their history, it's mind-boggling. In their long, long history, the Chinese have tried many different forms of government. Now, they're communist. But they have a rich cultural history to draw on as they try to figure out how to navigate through the future. So, in summary, the Chinese are a rising power, economically, technologically, and they have this astonishing cultural history. If China is the rising global power, who's the declining one? Well, that's us. Now, long time ago, a Greek historian named Thucydides said, when a rising power confronts a declining power, they're going to go to war. It's inevitable. A Harvard political scientist named Graham Allison studied 16 historical examples of rising powers confronting declining powers since the time of Thucydides, and he found that in 16 out of the 16 cases, 12 of them resulted in war. So it's possible to avoid war, but it isn't easy. That begs the question, Are we going to go to war with China? I sure hope not. Because with China's technological and industrial might, they can survive a long war, a war of attrition, better than we can. A Chinese man literally wrote the book on war. The man's name was Sun Tzu, and the English translation of the title of his book is The Art of War. That was written sometime in the 5th century BC. And it's still relevant and fresh today. I don't want us to go to war with China. Why? A bunch of reasons. One of which is we will lose. Instead of fighting, let's look on in admiration as the most ancient nation in the world reasserts itself and becomes the dominant world power in the last half of the 21st century, just as it was the dominant Asian power for most of its 2,000-year history. Xi Jinping, everyone. Xi Jinping.